evening. Good to have you with us in this edition of the Urban Debate. The big spotlight is what the world is talking about yet again. Afghanistan and the recent terror attack that took place last night in its capital city. Twin suicide blasts killing at least 100 people. Scenes of pain, despair and desperation that we've already seen outside the airport just multiplied 1,000 times yesterday and ever since. But despite the fear of another terror attack, despite the fear for their lives and that they may lose their lives outside the airport, people are choosing to escape the Taliban regime or try and escape the Taliban regime by still thronging to the Kabul airport, wanting to flee the country, wanting to just get out to the safety of another nation, across nationalities, locals, across various identities and tribes and religions of Afghans, other nationalities who are still there in Afghanistan and need to get out. Hundreds of them still getting together outside the airport, hoping to get in. The blast yesterday took place near the Kabul airport and the second one near the Baron Hotel close by. An alleged suicide bomber was involved in both of these attacks. But this hasn't stopped the evacuations. United States, United Kingdom are continuing with the evacuation operations at the airport as the deadline nears and the countries only have a few more days left. They only have officially time till 31st to get their people out. And then Taliban clamps down and takes full control and sets up its own government. So far, US has evacuated 4,500 of its citizens and families. But 1,500 are reportedly still in the country. Tonight, I want to talk about what this terror attack means for the world and specifically for India. Closer to home, in our neighborhood, ISIS-K has come back into focus. This is the group that has claimed responsibility for these dual explosions. ISIS-K, or the Islamic State Khorasan, is named after an old term for an Afghan region. The terror group actually began taking shape in eastern Afghanistan in the late 2014. Founded by hardliners in Pakistan, ISIS-K rapidly built reputation to extreme brutality. If there is a way of identifying this terror group, it is extreme brutality. In the past, they have challenged the Taliban for control of key areas, especially along the Pakistan border. A lot of their backing, a lot of their strength actually comes from Pakistan. They have carried out a series of suicide bombings in Kabul and other cities to establish the terror reign. Yes, ISIS-K has been around for a while now and active, involved in brutal execution of village elders, killing of Red Cross workers and suicide attacks on crowds. In fact, the US intel believes that ISIS-K bombed a girls' school, killing many, even did not spare a maternity hospital. They haven't spared a mosque, power infrastructures, fuel tankers, bus full of passengers, nothing. That's how extreme this group is. With close ties to Pakistan, to the Haqqani network, and we don't know just how closely they are now linked to the Taliban, but they are. And which is why it's very important to understand what is going on now and what can it mean. To give you some perspective, in 2017, US dropped a 20,000-pound bomb known as the mother of all bombs on the ISIS-K cave complex. They have been on the radar for a while, but they're still thriving, clearly shaking up the whole world with this specific attack. Let's say good evening to the panelists who are joining us right now for more perspective on that. Kadira Petiagoda, foreign policy expert, former Brookings Fellow, joins us this evening. Safia Gori Ahmed, Director for McClarty Associates, with us this evening. Dr. Lawrence Sellon, a colonel in the U.S. Army Reserve, retired. He served He's a veteran who served in Iraq and Afghanistan. We also got Lieutenant General Shokin Chauhan, former DG for Assam Rifles, GOC of 1 Corps. M.K. Bhadrakumar, former diplomat. Good evening to all of you, and thank you for speaking with us. Let me first up actually go to General Shokin Chauhan. General Chauhan, I mean, so far we were discussing Taliban and what Taliban's return means specifically for the world and for India. Let's add to that mix now another group, which is ISIS-K. That is, if we are to believe that it was indeed them and just them behind these attacks.
Yeah, so good evening, Tanvi. Thank you for getting me on the show. It's a very interesting development that happened yesterday, and very sad that we had these twin bomb blasts, one really bad one outside the airport and the other next to the Baron Hotel in Kabul. Now, what does it mean to India? Because I will go straight on to what it means for us. We've always known that the ISIS and the Haqqani network are in bed with each other. We're always very clear about the fact that any terrorist group that takes over Afghanistan creates a problem for us in within our minority communities, and of course in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. It's sad, but we do have a few misguided elements who are willing to listen to these very rabid radical groups. So what does it mean for us? It means that they will definitely try and create mayhem within India. We are prepared for that. We've been prepared for it for a very long time. And I can assure you, Tanvi, that we're absolutely ready. And, we will ensure that nothing really happens in India. How will this affect us? It will affect the movement of Indians back to India. There's no doubt about that. Flights might stop, flights might get delayed. Taliban might, stop people from going out of Afghanistan, that they've already done. But I'm certain that we've kept all these issues in mind, and we have our base in Tajikistan, and we are hoping that we will be able to evacuate all the Indians and all the other people who do want to come to India. So that's the issue, Tanvi, as far as we're concerned.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm going to come back to you for more on the India angle as well. We're going to talk about that in detail. But let me also now bring in our other panelists. And Safia Gori Ahmed, good evening to you. What is the message that the world gets once such an attack takes place outside the airport, in the middle of this transition period, in the middle of the period where Taliban hasn't fully established its government, US is still exiting, the deadline isn't here yet, and people across nationalities have become victims to this attack?
Look, I think it's just it was a terrible incident that happened yesterday. It really creates sort of a difficult situation for the Biden administration as they're trying to continue the evacuation process. President Biden has committed yesterday and said it was one of the worst days of his presidency thus far, but said basically that evacuations will continue. I think it complicates issues for him. It complicates and probably limits the amount of evacuations that the U.S. government is willing to do and the sort of efforts they're willing to undertake to evacuate Afghan civilians. But look, I think the sort of broader message is that there is this push and pull between ISIS-K and the Taliban. I think there's challenges there on the ground. There's an external counterterrorism threat that's happening. And I think the U.S. government is really thinking through how, they're thinking through their August 31st deadline. And for right now, they're trying to get as many Americans, there's still Americans on the ground, they're trying to get as many Americans out of Afghanistan as they can. They do not want to have Americans who are still in country after that deadline because of the threats that are ongoing in the region. They're also trying to get as many people who have been supportive of our U.S. troops out of the country as soon as possible. I think the government understands the threats to those people, but there's a tight, crushing deadline. And I think the attacks yesterday really complicate efforts to evacuate people. The crush outside the airport, the efforts that are ongoing have complicated multiple times because of the attacks yesterday and the attacks and the death of 13 U.S. forces members.
So, Dr. Lawrence Sellen, what are the options for U.S.? Just keep your head low, get out as many people as you can by 30th and move on? Or is there going to be, or should there be a strategy now to deal with another terror group that's directly now targeted U.S. citizens?
Well, I think
President Biden.
Yes, to
the
Dr.
United
Lawrence
States,
Lenin. Yes.
yes, the United States has very few options now, and that's a result of the poor planning for this evacuation. They didn't give it enough time. The location is bad, and they don't have military forces enough to deal with the time constraints and the location constraints. The United States should never have given up Bagram Air Base. Bagram Air Base was a place that you could secure. You could also secure the avenues of approach to Bagram Air Base and create the proper perimeter. What they did instead was rely on Kabul airport, and they were essentially surrounded by the Taliban, and the Taliban controlled access to the airport. And because of the very small perimeter around the airport, crowd control was very difficult. So they made every mistake possible, in my opinion.
Yes, very limited options, but what can be those options, or do they now have to fully, Mr. Bhadrakumar, fully now retreat and not go back to Afghanistan in any manner? Can United States afford to do that?
Well, I think the Biden administration will probably stick to the August 31st departure date. And
right.
The object now will be to get all the Americans out of Afghanistan and all the Afghans who helped the United States out of Afghanistan. But going into the future, I think it's very important that the resistance in Afghanistan, particularly originating in the Panjshir Valley with the Tajiks and Uzbeks there, that they are supported, that we can't recognize the Taliban government and we can't allow it to consolidate itself. And then we need to deal with Pakistan, because everyone knows that Pakistan is the epicenter of terrorism in South Asia. And Pakistan was not dealt with during the Afghan war. It was not an insurgency. It was a proxy war being waged by Pakistan against Afghanistan and the United States. So Pakistan will have to be dealt with in terms of it being the epicenter of terrorism. And that's where all the threats are going to come from.
Yes, Mr. Bhadrakumar, your view on this aspect?
I don't want to get into the evacuation topic. It's been discussed already. I focus on the incident in Kabul yesterday and what kind of challenges on the diplomatic front, political front, that will pose not only for the United States but also for regional states. United States is far away, and homeland security therefore is not in such peril as countries in the vicinity of Afghanistan, neighboring countries, regional states. Particularly, I think the ISIS is a potent threat for Central Asia. That is very important, and also for China, because when you say ISIS, clearly there are certain misconceptions here. That ISIS has been created by Pakistan. Now, that's a one-dimensional view. The reality is more complex than that, as far as I know. I've been watching this and studying it. In fact, one of the reasons why the Russians established contact with the Taliban and had communication with them regularly was that it was because of their realization of the utility of the Taliban to counter the ISIS, because the ISIS is what is worrying the Central Asian states and Russia and also China. And now the ISIS is a very composite group, and it has come out of defectors from Taliban itself, Haqqani network or radical elements within the Taliban itself, then from other terrorist groups which have migrated from other regions into Afghanistan, whether it is Xinjiang, whether it is Central Asia, and so on. And also, we need to reckon with this, the fighters who lost in the conflict in Syria and relocated themselves in Afghanistan.
Yes.
Now, that is an entirely different component. So now, you see, therefore, you have a situation where, we'll be reaching nowhere. If you look at it as a corporate body, when you say ISIS, and go hammer and tong at it. No, it's not like that. It's not with a command center and so on. it's kind of dispersed, and various kind of groups are there, and various kind of agendas are there. For example, the groups which have come from Uzbekistan or from Tajikistan, they have their own agenda. From North Caucasus, they have an agenda towards Russia, maybe. And similarly, Uyghurs are there in strong numbers, So it's going to be a very, very serious problem. And in my opinion, this really calls for some kind of a frank communication, strategic communication between the big powers. That is primarily between the United States, Russia, and China. And I really don't know whether in the kind of atmosphere that is prevailing today or on the international scene, whether that sort of a frank, candid communication is possible. Everyone needs to bring in transparency into it. And because there must be a realization that there is a convergence of interests. Only then can this challenge be dealt with. And then comes to the instrumentality. I think Taliban is a viable instrument, viable tool for countering this. So then comes a question, how do we interact with the Taliban? If you load it with too many human rights issues and other kinds of issues, we're not going to reach anywhere. This is a very, very serious security challenge.
Right.
And a one-dimensional view of it will not suffice in my assessment.
Okay, and I do have a follow-up to that, but I'll come back to you in just a bit. Thank you so much, Mr. Pediagora, for patiently waiting for your turn. Maybe I should have started off with this for the understanding of our viewers as well. But this attack and the fact that ISIS-K has claimed responsibility for it, what is the message that is being sent across? And do we look into the role and backing of the Haqqani network? Do we also, perhaps look at the possibility of Taliban having a role here? They seem to be, seeming like a better guy right now, with ISIS doing the job for them and keeping people away from the airport.
Yes, I think one of the clear messages that comes out of this, that I think ISIS was trying to send out, was that the Taliban is not in complete control. I think the Taliban has been trying to project an image of order and that they're enforcing security and they're trying to keep some semblance of order until these people are evacuated. In a sense, sort of reshaping their image a bit. And I think with this bomb blast, ISIS is seeking to embarrass the Taliban, to project that the battle for Afghanistan is not over and that there are other groups vying for control and creating chaos. And I think the important thing in a geopolitical sense is that when you have multiple groups here, you've got resistance movement, you've got the Taliban, you've got ISIS. I think that actually, whilst presenting a security threat for great powers, also presents an opportunity for great power meddling. So the countries like the United States, China, Russia, will be looking at the different players and seeing how they can really pursue their interests, given that the battle for Afghanistan is not completely over. And like the previous guest said, I think there's the regional countries like Russia and China have their own domestic issues, like with Chechnya in Russia and Xinjiang in China, which are susceptible to being influenced by this similar conflict. And you've got, ideological similarities between groups like ISIS and also the Taliban with some of the domestic groups in China and Russia. And of course, India as well faces similar security challenges. So I think it would be really interesting to see how the great powers come together to try and cooperate, or would their sort of animosity to each other be a greater force than their need or their goal of cooperating against these second-tier security threats. Because with the United States, for instance, I should emphasize, I think it's a good thing that Joe Biden pulled out, and I think it just emphasizes that the United States has shifted its focus from the war on terror onto more great power competition, and sees that its focus really needs to be now more on Russia and China than on terrorist groups. And I think we need to see how countries in the region react to that.
Okay, so you say it's a good thing that the Biden administration decided to pull out. Dr. Lawrence Sellin, do you agree with that, but accept the fact that they probably didn't do it in the right manner?
No, it was certainly not done in the right manner. I think that's crystal clear. The United States was going to get out of Afghanistan eventually, but it was just done in a very poorly planned and chaotic manner. I'd just like to make one comment about the Islamic State of Khorasan. That group has taken the route that essentially all the terrorist groups in Pakistan has taken. They always splinter, and these splinter groups are always more violent and dangerous than the group that they came from. And they're always vying for prominence among each other. But in the end, they are co-belligerents, and they will join together to fight what they consider a bigger enemy. And that's what we should be concerned about. Just in the last 2 weeks, there's been a report that Masood Azhar of Jaish-e-Mohammed, the terrorist group in Pakistan, has had a meeting in Kandahar with the Taliban leadership. So this is a situation where they are likely to refocus their efforts against India. And this is where the danger is, not within specific splinter groups in the Islamic terrorist area, but these groups, when they work together, in particular, when they focus on other countries, for example, India. This is a real danger.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think for India, it's a bigger challenge because we are right here. Pakistan has great interest in using this land and these splinter groups and directing them towards India. China would have absolutely no problem in teaming up with Pakistan and pushing this against India. And we have to prepare for that. But before I go into that, Safia Gori, the world surely can't think their problems are over once the evacuation is done. The fact that Taliban has emerged stronger than before with the entire arms and armory that the US troops had left there at their behest, the fact that the Haqqani group and all other Pak-backed terror groups exist, continue to thrive with weapons, with funding that is required, the fact that ISIS-K is able to carry out this attack surely shows that this entire region is going to be extremely unstable with quite a bit of terrorists on that soil. That can't make the world a safer place.
I think you're absolutely right. I think, this recent terror attack does absolutely show that the Taliban cannot control their internal territory. I think it shows that there's a likelihood of additional attacks even before the 31st. I think we all hope that there isn't, but I think that there's a high likelihood of the plotting of additional attacks as we continue to evacuate the airport. I think there's been multiple conversations during President Biden's, comments about the heightened threat alert and security, threats coming from the region. I think this is something that is only going to increase given our withdrawal from the region. And I think this is the conversation that had been going on with regional partners in Pakistan, in India, about the U.S. access to bases and U.S. access to maintain a presence, of course, a smaller presence in the region, but it allowed the U.S. government to have sort of eyes and ears on the ground and maintain sort of resources on the ground. And I think the fact that those conversations haven't gone the way that I think the administration had planned really does create sort of that heightened threat alert because, we're just seeing sort of these increased threats and these attacks. And I think we're going to see more in the region in the upcoming days, unfortunately. I think the fact that we can't sort of pin this as a internal Afghan threat, that this is a ISIS versus Taliban issue. I don't think that that's something that can be seen from that lens. And so I definitely think it's sort of a broader national security threat that the U.S. and the region needs to really it needs to be addressed. Just to sort of speak about the timeline, having worked at the State Department in the Obama administration on Afghanistan and Pakistan, I think hard and fast deadlines in a negotiation may not have been the best approach. We lose leverage, and I do think that maintaining a presence there is not the right approach. But I think the way that this drawdown and the way that this sort of evacuation has happened has been a complete nightmare. But I also think that the negotiation process with the Taliban has also has not been successful in any way. And so I really do think that this is a real stain on the Biden administration.
I think more and more people are beginning to agree on that. I think it's very difficult to now find people who say, at least on the handling part, this was a good job done by Biden administration. But one more thing that I wanted to focus on and take that point to Kadira Petia Goda. What about Pakistan? So far, we haven't seen a concerted effort to pressurize Pakistan into really clamping down on these terror groups. I mean, U.S. can go into Afghanistan, spend 20 years, get out with the terror groups still existing, because Pakistan continues to support them. Pakistan continues to fund them, train them on their soil and spread terror in the entire region. Why is it that that doesn't interest anybody from West to look into?
Well, I think the United States was heavily reliant on Pakistan. From the time after September 11, they really needed Pakistani support for the various agendas that they had, whether it be the Al Qaeda battle or the Afghanistan war. And I think that the United States is always generally quite cautious of pushing Pakistan or pressuring Pakistan too much, because they know that Pakistan already has a strong relationship with China. And I think for the United States, the big game is really China. And so anything that strengthens China's geostrategic influence, particularly through Central Asia, anything that allows China to fill any kind of vacuum will be avoided by the US. So I think that's really the number one priority for the US, which is to not push Pakistan too much towards China.
Mr. Badru Kumar, is there more scope to do that? They've already teamed up, and working closely from everything from on-ground infrastructure projects to diplomacy as well. Why is it that the attention still isn't going into the root problem, which is the terror that's being sponsored by Pakistan? Once in a while, Mr. Badru Kumar, we see international agencies pressurize Pakistan to act against terror. They'll send in one of these terror leaders into the jail for a couple of days and release them, and that's that. Why are we not able to go beyond it?
Hopping too much on this means, that we are being propagandistic. This is a very serious matter, in my opinion, and we should sort of put down this baggage of prejudices and propaganda. I really don't think that it is proper to put the blame on Pakistan. This is a very serious topic, ISIS, and that challenge has to be met with in a very different way. And Pakistani state doesn't have the capability to do it. And the ISIS also, we should not exaggerate its importance, because its number is very few, and it can be contained. But the point is, there has to be a kind of a consensus. That is what is lacking here. And berating Pakistan, I don't know to what extent it really serves the purpose, if we are serious about this challenge.
So how do you tackle this challenge? What would you say?
Sorry?
How would you say we should tackle this challenge, and what is exactly our challenge?
Yes, it is. It is. You must understand that it is a supranational entity. It is drawn from different countries. It's drawn from different continents. It speaks different languages, for example. So it's not possible for any single country to handle it. And in my opinion, it is best handled by stabilizing the situation within Afghanistan, which means that the United States must really have rethink about its attitude towards the Taliban government, assuming one is shaping up, and I think it is shaping up, and I think it is going to be an inclusive government. So those yardsticks are going to be met with. And after the searing pain that everyone went through in Kabul a couple of days back, now it is time for a rethink. And that realism should take us to rallying behind the inclusive government in Kabul, strengthening it, and stabilizing the situation. Taliban has the capability. They are sons of the soil, and they have the capability to tackle this. And that's the one way and only way that we can address this challenge, in my opinion. The regional states are acutely conscious of this because, as I mentioned, India doesn't face this ISIS challenge to that extent as we would like to make it out to be. Certainly we need to be cautious about it. But the cadres are drawn from Central Asia, Caucasus, Chinese, Xinjiang, and so on. So you see, the agenda is more towards that. And the Russians have already said that the bulk of the ISIS cadres, drawn from different groups, they are all located in northern Afghanistan. So, and they are not under the control of the Pakistanis. I think we should be very clear about this. And therefore, proceed through the Taliban, proceed through the Kabul government, equip it, and give it political support and try to stabilize the situation. If something rash is done, like building up a resistance movement against the Taliban, there's too much of geopolitics in this, frankly. And that is the biggest threat. Then in that kind of a climate, the advantage goes to the ISIS. Surely you can count on them to exploit such a situation, which is why I said that it must begin at the level of the big powers. A kind of a matrix of understanding needs to be evolved, and that can only happen through transparent conversation. And with this kind of rivalries which are going on today, I don't know whether that is feasible, that is even realistic.
Okay. Let me also at this point thank Mr. Petiya Gowda, Safia Gori Ahmed, and Dr. Lawrence Sellen for joining us on this conversation. Of course, General Chauhan and Mr. Badr Kumar continue to stay with us. I also say good evening to Professor Swaran Singh, Chairman of CIPOD, the Central for International Politics, Organization and Disarmament at JNU, and Ryan Lakshman, Associate Editor with The Hindu. But General Chauhan, coming back to you, would you agree with what Mr. Badr Kumar is saying, that ISIS-K may not be a very big challenge for us, for India specifically, and even the fact that we give too much importance to the terror backing that comes or that Pakistan does to all the groups on Pakistani soil and in neighboring regions?
Tanvi, I agree entirely. Absolutely. This is the narrative that we must be absolutely clear with. We have been fighting this terrorism from 1988. And Pakistan has thrown everything on us, absolutely everything on us. We were there when the Taliban was in power. We were there when we were still fighting them then. When the Taliban came in, even then. And this has continued for the last 20, 30 years. And we've been able to contain the situation. This overemphasis on one group and how cruel they are and all that, we face them, Tanvi, we can deal with that. But that's not the issue. The issue is, how is it going to affect our standing in Afghanistan? In 2011, when I was briefing Sir Peter Wall, the British Army chief, we were very clear, and we briefed him and told him that, look, don't cut and run from Afghanistan. Don't do that, because you will create a problem there. Now, what this happened actually in Afghanistan was that there is a power struggle in Afghanistan. The ISIS is backed by the Haqqani group, which says, look, we are the powerful group and we deserve more seats, or we deserve greater power within the Taliban setup. So what's going to happen in Afghanistan is, will our ability to influence anything in Afghanistan reduce? That's what they're trying. As far as India is concerned, we can handle them. We've handled them before for the last 30 years, and we can continuously handle them for the next 30 years. We're not worried about that, Tanvi. So that's not a problem at all. And we're taking care, and the Indian Army is absolutely clear that we can handle all these fellows, and we've done that over the last 30 odd years.
Okay, so you're saying the terror threat isn't much. We have to just see what is the extent of influence that we can still, have in Afghanistan. Professor Swaran Singh, good evening to you. We're now focusing specifically on the recent developments and the future of Afghanistan and what that means for India. How should India handle this? Do you believe that we need to right away start further conversations with Taliban?
I heard Ambassador Bhadra Kumar saying that there is need for transparent conversation. I see no signs of Government of India thinking of transparent conversations at this stage. I also fully agree with General Shawkeen's confidence in Indian Armed Forces. They have tackled these challenges for the last 30 plus years. But to not accept the reality that coming of Taliban in power in Kabul, and this recent episodes of bombing of ISKP is not a matter of concern for India. I am not too sure of that. I think, in my view, it's a great matter of concern for India, because Taliban coming itself is going to likely create a new nexus of China, Pakistan, and now Taliban. And if these are kind of outfits like the ISKP is going to be really active, and they have been really active since 2019, we are all aware of it. Then, who are they going to really damage? Is it Xinjiang of China? China has been constantly involved in engaging Taliban. Is it Chechnya of Russia? No, Russia also has been constantly engaged with Taliban. Kashmir, India has been engaged in a very, very indirect and limited fashion is where I think my concern would be. And another very quick point is, if you look at what is happening in Pakistan, Azhar Mursood had a meeting with Maula Baradar recently, where he's gone there to say that if you have already succeeded in Afghanistan, we need your help against India. Look at what Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf leaders are saying, speaking the same language in terms of their expectations from Taliban. Now, Taliban central leaders, maybe because they require international recognition, maybe still talking in civilized language, but their basic trust is Sharia. And it's not fundamentals that have changed. It's only the cosmetics which are changing now. And the worst is no government in place, and this kind of chaos that we see will give advantage to these outfits. Cadres of Taliban are not at all organized. Even in armed forces, which are most organized, you can see sometimes there are sort of, actions that happen not the big central command would like to see on the ground. Taliban has no control on these outfits which are together coming, and how will they form this some kind of a inclusive government is what the language is. And I think my hope also is in an inclusive government where is some of the older people who are running Afghanistan so far, have experience of running Afghanistan, come to form part of the government. Then I think India would have some access and goodwill to use in that sense. Otherwise, if it is completely dominated by Pakistan and Taliban and Haqqani brothers and others, I think it's time for India to take note and not really, be in that sense overconfident of nothing is going to happen out of it for India.
Okay, so we now know where Mr. Bhadra Kumar, General Chauhan, and Mr. Singh stand, Professor Singh stand. Let's find out where Narayan Lakshman stands on this issue of whether or not it's a very big challenge or threat for us, terror-wise and diplomatically.
Well, Tanvi, I do think I agree with the earlier speakers that it's a serious challenge, and the nexus is extremely complex. That is the primary reason for it. Pakistan is involved. We know that Taliban historically has very deep networks with the ISI and other institutions in Pakistan. And like it was said earlier, there is a very strong vested interest there to take advantage of the current situation, the chaos, the ability to set up terror training camps and to veer that towards the eastern border and start causing trouble for Kashmir and elsewhere along the Indian border. So I think we cannot underestimate the size of this challenge. At the same time, I think sort of diffusing the intensity of that threat will require creativity and even willingness to adapt our thinking, India's thinking in terms of the Taliban. So first thing is to recognize that the reason this America's, multi-generational cycles of, occupation, regime change, and attempted, the creation of so-called peace in Afghanistan has failed is because there is a dissonance between the tribal nature of that society and formal democratic norms of a Western conception, which cannot be transplanted there. Indeed, all of those so-called leaders who are experienced, whether they're talking about Karzai or Abdullah, so many others, they have all come. They I think deep down do appreciate the Taliban and Afghanistan's tribal nature, and therefore there is a sense that you'll have to find a different system of governance there. India has to shift its thinking and has to be willing to engage with the Taliban towards accepting that kind of goal. Obviously, the global community has red lines in the sand, such as women's rights, children's rights to education, and all of those things. And if those get crossed flagrantly and blatantly, there will be action, there will be blowback from the global community. But so long as the Taliban is operating within those lines, whatever their unique customs, even if we find some of it distasteful, we must work towards separating them from those deep networks to Pakistan. That is going to be the focal point for us if we want to avoid another choke point, another terror attack, something that will force our hand and push this region into complete anarchy. So I think two things. One, work with the Taliban. Do not shun them. And two, do not underestimate how close they are to Pakistan. Give them an incentive, whether it's in terms of development, whether it's in terms of trade opportunities or proving themselves. Give them the opportunity to prove themselves to their own population. That will give India a chance at working towards stability and no blowback on its own shores.
Okay, interesting that you say that. Let me take it back to Mr. Bhadra Kumar. Mr. Bhadra Kumar, so like you said, you would believe that the way forward is to have that conversation with the Taliban. What is it that India needs to protect in terms of its own interests if we do decide to do that?
You see, if we go by empirical evidence, there is nothing to show that Taliban has an agenda beyond the boundaries of Afghanistan. It is by its very nature, it belongs to the family of traditional Islam. Its roots are indigenous, and it still enjoys, we must understand propaganda, setting aside that, we must understand that this sort of sweep, that it had in a matter of 10 days, creating a wave and, bringing the whole place under control, it's not possible without a certain degree of local support. And then the most important thing is that with all its idiosyncrasies, there is no other counterpoint today in Afghanistan. And that must be kept in mind all the time. Where is the counterpoint? That we put together something like a Northern Alliance in the 1990s? Preposterous. The conditions have changed so much. So if we keep berating the Taliban for this, that they have an eye on India, I think, we might end up creating a problem there. There is a certain Afghanness which is ultimately going to prevail once they are in power and responsibilities come and they have to concentrate on governance and so on. Our experience is going back to the early 90s. It's the same thing more or less. That, 7 groups which were, in the Pakistani playpen for a decade, equipped, trained, fed, everything by the Pakistani security establishment with Saudi funding and American patronage. And then they take over in Kabul. And at that time, we had nothing. And I was in Islamabad at that time. And, we never, ever were allowed to go anywhere near them. That was the kind of way that the Pakistani security establishment sequestered them. But then once they were in power in Kabul, within 6 months, they put out feelers to India. They said they wanted to talk to us, and they came here to Delhi. And so, the Afghanness is something, we cannot theoretically discuss this matter.
Okay, but can we, Mr. Badrukumar, can we, set up ties, use our history, all the support that we've given to this country, can we use that and have conversations with Taliban to ensure that there is some support from them when it comes to dealing with Pak groups, when it comes to dealing with the Haqqani network or any other terror groups who may want to move from Pakistan to Afghanistan or to China's growing influence? Is that possible?
You have to understand the person's temperament. He's a very fiercely independent-minded man, and he will not work as a subaltern. They set aside this time when they were in the countryside and staging an insurgency. Once they come to power, and if we engage them, not only India, international community engages them, then the Afghans will come out of these people. That has been our experience with the Mujahideen. That's what I was trying to say. And then, do not overlook the fact that there is a bedrock there, which is the enormous goodwill towards India among the common people there. And the other part of it is there is equally a certain negative feeling towards Pakistan due to Pakistan's projection of power into Afghanistan, not only in this last decade or two, but going back to Zahir Shah's time. So, all these things work to our advantage. And therefore, if we engage them and put rings of engagement around the Taliban that's set up there, our security considerations can be more or less coupled to the fact that on the ground we will be in a state of preparedness, as the general was saying earlier. I don't see much of a problem. We should try to look for an opportunity to go there as early as possible. Now it is quite clear that within a week or so, the inclusive government will come to power. And there are going to be people there who are extremely close to India and very friendly towards India, like Hamid Karzai and Abdullah and so on. So we haven't lost anything. I don't know why we should be, frantic about it. We can have a conversation.
You had raised this issue earlier as well. The last time you were on a debate with us, and I've had several other experts also raise this, partner Ryan. Do you have a view on whether we should have exited and pulled out all of our embassy staff already so quickly, and should we now, prepare to move back within a week or 10 days?
You see, that postmortem is not quite important now.
Yes, Mr. Badrukumar, if I can just take that question across to Narayan Lakshman.
Yeah, Tanvi, I think your question actually, underscores the point that part of the reason why India has been a little bit silent at this point is explained by the fact that it has not really been consulted by any of the partners in forging their own Afghanistan strategy, whether the US or even others who could have made a difference, such as Russia. There's been no overt consultation with explicitly stated goals and coordinated efforts. And so India has pretty much had to look out for itself and has joined the sort of ragtag efforts of each nation acting for itself in evacuating its staff and pulling out all its resources. So I think India will first take some time to assess the situation. Firstly, assess the damage caused by this chaotic and extremely violent exit, and then take time to see how the Taliban government settles in. Now, this goes back to the point I made earlier. Their form of governance and government may not at all be, may not converge with any of the ideas that other nations, especially democracies, have about how to run things. So they may split it up along tribal lines. There may continue to be clashes within some parts of their territory, leading to to questions about whether the Taliban's own control of this whole country is contested. So how would India, frame its strategy? How would it choose its tenor of engagement with the Taliban in that context? So I think these things have to get bedded down only over the coming months, probably. I don't think there's any question of rushing back in there. At the same time, those resources and feet that we have on the ground or will have on the ground to engage the interlocutors there will emphasize exactly what Mr. Badrukumar said earlier, which is the civilizational links, if you will, the immense and well-documented closeness of the Afghan and Indian people. And of course, let's not forget our absolute vitality in the region as an enormous trading partner and someone through whom economic benefits can actually legitimize the Taliban's own rule in their country. So that is a very, very powerful incentive. So India does hold certain cards, and I don't see India rushing back in there until it is able to assess the form of government and the type of governance that the Taliban will institute in Afghanistan.
Wait and watch. That's what even the Ministry of External Affairs said today, Professor Swaran Singh, that they're not going to decide until they see who's on the other side, what kind of a government is formed in Afghanistan, and only then will they take a decision. Is that the correct way forward?
I think it's a correct way, because until a government is formed in Kabul, there is no way any formal response in terms of policy or interaction or approach can be made. And because at this stage, nobody knows who is going to be sitting in what place, and there are increasingly tensions growing within various factions of Taliban and other outfits there. And when it comes to goodwill that India has, two things I wish to very quickly say. One, the civilizational link is important, but remember that civilizational link also include area which is today called Pakistan. So it's not India which is only talking of those civilizational links here. And second, the kind of influence that Pakistan has held in last 2 to 3 decades, since early 1990s, we talk of Rawalpindi Shaura today. Is there any comparable agency, organization, outfit in India that can claim that kind of influence in virtually guiding day-to-day activities in Taliban's control? And finally, the way such forceful takeover of power, if nothing else, is going to inspire other outfits in the region. And that would include those who wish ill for India in that sense. So I think that, more inclusive government, the more, people who were already governing Afghanistan, whether it is Amrullah Saleh or other people, if they are part of the government, there is a little hope that India would be kind of able to engage and influence. I think India will have to continuously, do that lukewarm engagement that India has done. Not only India, different countries have named their engagement with Taliban very differently. Some are talking of logistic level, operative level, back channel conversations, all kinds of. It's kind of every country is trying to find some access. And I think the way India is able to rescue not just Indian citizens and people of Indian origin, but also of Nepal recently, is to me an indication that India also has some kind of access and contact on the ground there, because it's not just airport. How do people reach at airport? So in that sense, I'm sure government may not be able to sort of really share everything that is happening on the ground at this stage. We are doing what perhaps India can do, but I think there is a reason to worry, because the nature of the new regime which is going to take over Taliban is showcasing a very different kind of cadre on the ground, which has no control. Central leadership has virtually no control on them. It's a warlords kind of a situation. I understand Western democracies cannot be superimposed in some of these countries, and I would understand there are several Islamic emirates which India has good relations with. But the nature of this particular outfit and the way they are kind of trying to take over power, and the nexus that they have with Pakistan, increasingly also Chinese have deep pockets. I mean, they can incentivize any regime. I mean, you have seen how they've dealt with various regimes that came over after Soviet Union collapsed in Central Asia, and how they managed to demarcate their territories and boundaries within a matter of 2 years. So Chinese will have a very, very deep influence in the Taliban. And I think in that sense, also the nexus, as you mentioned, of China, Taliban, and Pakistan is something that could, sort of be something which is India has to really be careful. It's a kind of a limited leeway that we have, and I think it's very difficult for a large democracy like India to switch immediately from one side to the other, and it takes a little time in doing that.
Okay. All right, completely out of time. So I'm going to thank all of our panelists for joining us. Thank you for being here and sharing your views, different views coming in. Fact of the matter is, we are going to be looking very closely at what happens in Afghanistan. The immediate, of course, is to ensure everybody is safely back home. Those who are still there do not face any threat. And then we need to see how the situation in Afghanistan evolves with the Taliban, with the various groups, the subgroups, splinter groups, the terror groups, ISIS, ISIS-K as it's now known as, this part is known as, the Haqqani network, which is also getting stronger and stronger in Kabul and other parts of Afghanistan. What do? The resistance and the fear that still many have of possibility of a civil war in Afghanistan. India, unlike many others in the West, needs to be on its toes simply because it's right in our backyard. And any spillover of the terror is going to impact us. And two of our neighbors, Pakistan and China, are already extremely active in engaging with various forces which are into play in Afghanistan. That impacts our life. So we have to be extremely careful of how we tackle this situation. Thank you for joining us.